Buongiorno. My name is John Palfrey, and I'm delighted to be coming to you through this video to your conference. I am really very grateful that I was invited to participate in the conference, and I'm so sorry that I had to be in Asia. I had separate plans from before the conference, but I'm thrilled that I'm able to be with you through this video. Most recently, I am the author of a book called Bibliotech, and I'm delighted that it will be coming out in translation in Italy, and thank you so much to our publishers in Italy, and thank you for the invitation to be able to talk a little about this book before it comes out. I wanted to start with the idea of the subtitle. So the book is called Bibliotech, and the subtitle is Why Libraries Matter More Than Ever in the Age of Google. And I think that one could imagine making the argument that libraries still matter in the age of Google, that the fact that somebody can search from anywhere in the world and get lots of answers on a device like this that most of us have on our bodies, that seems like a challenge to libraries that is reasonably easily met, to say, even though we can get access to this information, that we still need libraries for a variety of reasons. But I tried actually in the subtitle and in this book to make a slightly harder argument, to make the argument that in fact we need libraries more than we did before the age of these smartphones and this digital era. So that's actually in some ways I think the trickier question, but I feel very strongly that it is the case. Backtracking a little bit, the reason why I wrote this book, I was director of a library as well as a law professor in a previous job. And when I first started that job, I would often meet somebody in a cocktail party or at a barbecue, and they would ask me what I was up to, and I'd said, well, I'm starting to be director of a library, and they would look at me and say, you're not a librarian. I'd say, yes, that's true. And they'd say, oh, you're a digital person. I say, yes, I study digital media. They say, oh, now I get it. You're the digital guy. You're going to get rid of the library. Now that we have Google, we don't need it anymore. And then they would walk away to another part of the party, and I'd be, wait, trying to get to talk to them more and say, no, that's actually not the point. But of course, they had already left and had gotten another drink, and they were on to the next. So I decided that I had to write a book to make that same argument. I realized that's sort of a flawed approach because that guy who went off and had the drink doesn't want to read a whole book about libraries, but in any event, I felt it was important to make the case anyway. So ultimately, I do believe that libraries are more important, not less so, in the digital era. I think of this for a variety of reasons. One is that I think places become even more important when we have these digital devices that are often pulling us apart from one another. So at least in the United States, and I'm guessing this is true in Italy as well, the predominant effect of having these phones and these smartphones, as well as the iPads and the tablets and the PCs and so forth that consume a lot of our attention, is often it pulls us away from one another. We might be sitting on the bus and everybody is, instead of talking to one another, they're staring into their phone. You might be at home watching a movie, more likely than going out to a movie in the theater and so forth. People are participating in civic life, sometimes from behind a screen rather than coming out into the public square. So I think it is more important, not less so, that we have places, public places, that people come out to that are zones of civic life. And libraries have been this for a long time. I think that's more important, not less so, than in the past. Second, I think it does have to do with materials like this, which is to say, even though those who are wealthy could download on one of their devices more or less whatever they wanted in terms of a book or music or movies, there are lots of people in society who can't afford to do that. And increasingly, if the way in which people are getting access to materials is actually paying for them on digital devices, for instance, buying them through Amazon or an on-demand service of various sorts, then we need more than ever a place for people actually to get copies for free. And I think this is one of the things that public libraries and academic libraries and special libraries have done, which is they've always ensured that there is access to materials that allow us to be citizens in our democracies, to live a public and meaningful life by virtue of being able to get access to that knowledge. So increasingly, as people are more and more often downloading the materials that they need and often paying for them on an a la carte basis, we need places that make the information available in ways that are free to all. And I think that public libraries stand for that. And then there's a third argument which really talks about how libraries can do many more things in this knowledge economy, in this service-oriented economy than they've done in the past. And I think that's actually some of the exciting work that's going on in many libraries. In addition to doing the kinds of things libraries have done for so long, they're taking on new and exciting tasks. And some of that is actually in the digital environment, taking on the role of providing information through digital environment, so actually creating new applications, creating new ways to show, for instance, a stack of books. We've got at the high school where I work, which is called Phillips Academy in Andover, Mass., we have a student who has taken some software and he has found a way visually to display a series of books as though it were a bookshelf, and you can page your way through it and you can access those materials if they're digitally available, or it gets you to a library record. There are lots of really interesting ways that you can create new forms of search and discovery using these technologies. So this third category is to say we need libraries more than ever to come up with and to find information and knowledge in ways that will be public interested, public oriented. I'm excited to see what libraries do in that respect. So you might step back and say, what are the challenges that libraries are facing today? And for all of you who work in libraries, you know this very well. One of them, I think, is the fact that these corporations such as Google and Amazon, both of which I've mentioned earlier, are so effective and so powerful in the consumer role of providing access to information. Of course, in the case of Google, it is through search. In the case of Amazon, it's through the direct provision of materials, as well as recommendations, something that librarians historically have been doing in a person-to-person way. So I think one of the challenges to libraries is, what do you do about the extent to which Google has become so powerful in search, and Amazon has become so powerful in the distribution and recommendation of materials? Ditto for Netflix or a number of other companies that have done this very, very well, or Spotify, Pandora in the case of music. I think the answer is that libraries have to figure out what are the places where libraries are going to compete with those entities, and in what places are they actually going to say, no, it's just fine that ready reference, for instance, the quick answer to a topic is going to be provided through a Google search and through a Wikipedia page that has a perfectly good answer to something that somebody might have gone to a library to do before. And I think the answer, at least from my perspective, and the answer that I put in this book, is a little of both. I don't think libraries need to recreate Wikipedia or recreate Google. I think that would be a mistake. So I think in many respects there are things that have been done by libraries in the past that libraries don't have to do, services they don't necessarily have to provide in the same way. But I actually think there are many ways in which libraries should get in the same business, the same digital business. So that what I worry about is if for-profit firms do all of the things that libraries have done in the past, I think there's a point at which libraries become obsolete, or people start to perceive libraries as obsolete. So imagine this, which is, in order to get access to a book or an article, people go to their smartphone and then they type in the search term and they go to a search engine. It might be Google, it might be somebody else who replaces them. They then go to a for-profit firm, because all of the search results have for-profits at the top when they type in the name of this book or this article or this song. They then go to Apple iTunes, or they go to Netflix, or they go to Amazon to consume it. And if ultimately that is the predominant way, whether it's with respect to scholarship or it's with respect to entertainment goods, if that's the way that everybody gets their information and people ultimately rely on that much more, and libraries don't have some kind of an entry into that, I think it could make it very difficult for libraries to get the kind of funding and support that they need to continue. So one argument I make about libraries is it's really important for them to get in the business of having at least some results in a search result, for instance. So if you were to create library catalog records that would show up high in such a search result, then maybe someone would be drawn into a library. And maybe, in fact, they'd be drawn into a library's digital catalog and be able to download something directly as an ebook. Even without going to a library, that could be a very valuable thing to do. Better yet, maybe it's something that generates a response where the person does get up out of their chair and does go to a library. But I think if libraries sit back and let that entire process run without them, I think there is a real risk to doing that. So one of the arguments that I make in Bibliotech is the fact that libraries need to invest more in research and development in the digital zone. They need to be more in the game that Google and Wikipedia and Netflix and Amazon are in. Now, that's not to say that you're going to create a total library-centric search engine, a totally library-centric or library-developed next version of an online encyclopedia and so forth. But it is to say that libraries have to have a presence and a footprint, perhaps, or pathways within that digital environment, and need to create that. One of the ways that we are working to do that in the United States is a project called the Digital Public Library of America. I'm the founding chairman of this entity. It's actually based at the Boston Public Library, which you may know is the first large public library in a city in the world. Boston Public Library founded around 1850, and this digital public library in America now is nestled in that same building, which we think is a very important resonance, thinking about, for the digital age, creating a public library online. And it's a very simple premise. It's the premise of creating online materials that are free and accessible to all, things that have been digitized in the cities and towns around the country, also materials that are in the public domain and can be shared freely in this digital public library, also having code that is open source, and also metadata, information about the information, so the metadata that is open access. So everything in the Digital Public Library of America is freely accessible, whether it's the content, the actual book or article or image. The code itself is open source and can be reused, and the metadata is open access, so people can use that for any purpose. And the way it works in direct form is the state of the United States I live in is called Massachusetts, just to take an example. There are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts alone, and people want to digitize material. What they can do is work with the Digital Commonwealth, which is our local effort based at the Boston Public Library, and the guy will get in a car and he'll drive around to the cities and towns, and he will find the things that people want to digitize and will digitize them. They then get put in a state-based enterprise, which is this Digital Commonwealth, and then all of those state-based things, the United States, we have 50 states, those come into this national system, which is called the Digital Public Library of America, by virtue of this open source code that we've created. It's a little bit like what's happened in Europe in Europeana. So in fact, the very first thing that we did when we created the Digital Public Library of America was to enter into an agreement with Europeana, a memorandum of understanding. And so we've actually created the DPLA to look a lot like the Europeana model, and also to use many of the same systems that Europeana has, so that we can share materials a lot. So we, in fact, the very first exhibit we created for the Digital Public Library of America was about immigration. As you well know, there have been many people who have emigrated from Italy, for instance, to the United States, and vice versa over time, but predominantly in the 19th century from Italy to the US or other parts of Europe. And those stories that people have created are ones that are kept in some libraries in the old world and some in the new, and there's wonderful opportunities for creating shared exhibits, for instance, as well as having shared metadata around these topics and these stories and these journeys that help us understand our culture and our history and how they're intertwined. And this collaboration between Europeana and the DPLA, I think, can make that much richer over time. So I have very high hopes for the kinds of things libraries can do on a national level or a local level, but also on an international level in terms of the kinds of collaborations that are between things like Europeana and the DPLA. Last of all, I was asked to mention a few things about the broader discussion about the web and where it's headed and internet. What I've argued for here in this book and in this speech today has been really to focus on the kinds of systems that libraries are creating and making sure that they continue to be open and they continue to be connected in the digital realm, as well as providing the great physical services in spaces and with books that they have historically. I think this is true broadly for the web. I think when we think about education, or we think about journalism, or we think about politics, I think it's equally crucial that the online environment be a place where people are talking about serious ideas, where it's possible to share your ideas freely. So I think free expression is a very important thing to protect. But I also think it's very important that we continue to have a free and open internet itself. This is a battle that is fought in a political sense, in a policy sense, in the United States on a daily basis. It's true, of course, also in Europe. I think these things are deeply connected. One of the reasons that I got actually interested in libraries was as somebody who was focused on the internet and digital media. When we were in policy discussions about things like network neutrality or like privacy, we would continuously see librarians as people who are advocating effectively for a free and open internet. So I think there's a very strong alliance between those who are thinking about the network and thinking about the infrastructure in a very public-spirited way, and people are thinking about libraries in an open and public-spirited way. So ultimately, I think that the best thing that librarians could do in a way is to join forces with people who are looking at open source technologies, who are looking at the way in which to keep the network free and open, looking effectively at the ways in which we need to ensure user privacy and the rights of individuals. I think these are very similar to the things that libraries most need as we head into this digital age. It's been wonderful to have a chance to share a few words with you. Again, thank you for the chance to speak with you, even from afar. I'm very sorry not to be there. Grazie, and I look forward to see you in person another time. Thank you so much.